Mr. President, I'd be remiss if I didn't rise during this debate on energy to address the administration's continuing efforts to wear down America's coal industry. As the Senate considers reform of our nation's energy infrastructure, the importance of coal to America's energy portfolio simply cannot be understated. Unfortunately, neither can this administration's deliberate attempts to use executive power to put the coal industry out of business. This administration has made no secret of its disdain for fossil fuels and has unleashed a series of policies intended to subvert reliable, affordable, traditional energy sources such as oil and natural gas in favor of valuable but more expensive and less reliable renewable resources. We have a lot of wind in Wyoming. In fact, the first wind turbines that were put in, the rotors blew off till they discovered they could turn them into the wind at 80 miles an hour. But even though we have a lot of wind, I guess we're another one of those Saudi Arabia wind and solar and coal and oil and natural gas and uranium, we have found that sometimes the wind doesn't blow. And we have found that sometimes the sun doesn't shine. And sometimes the wind doesn't blow when the sun isn't shining. And that creates a problem unless you have alternate fuels. Coal is at the center of that regulatory battle, and the war on coal is not only an affront to coal producers in my home state of Wyoming, but to energy consumers across America. Let me explain how the administration's war on coal affects Americans across the country with this chart. According to the Energy Information Administration, 39% of the United States electricity was generated by coal in 2014. The only other energy source that comes close to coal for energy production is natural gas at 27%. We need to ask ourselves, if we allow the administration to kill the coal industry, what energy source is going to take its place and provide our constituents with the energy they need? It's actually the only stockpilable resource that we have. This issue hits close to home for me because approximately 40% of the country's coal is produced in my home state of Wyoming. Actually, 40% is produced in my home county of Campbell County, Wyoming. According to the National Mining Association, coal supports more than 27,000 jobs in my state. Now, 27,000 probably doesn't sound like a lot in California or Washington, D.C. or New York, or maybe Texas, but that's 9% of our workforce. 9% of our workforce have jobs related to coal. And these are good paying jobs. They average about $81,500 a year. Multiply that times 27,000 jobs and we're talking about billions. But let me be clear, this isn't just an issue for Wyoming or other coal-producing states. The Wyoming Mining Association reported that in 2014, 30 states received coal from Wyoming's mines. Now, this is just the red ones are the states that receive Wyoming coal. That doesn't mean that they don't receive electricity produced in Wyoming from coal, which would be California, Utah, Idaho, perhaps. But for those states, for sure, we produce them. And of course, on this carbon issue, we get credited with the carbon that produces the energy that they use. So, the second chart shows that if you represent Texas, Illinois, or Missouri, you should be worried about the coal industry because in 2014, each of those states received more than 10% of Wyoming's coal. Now, Wisconsin, Iowa, Kansas, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Michigan each got about 5% of Wyoming's coal. Wyoming's coal was also distributed to Nebraska, Georgia, Alabama, Colorado, Louisiana, Tennessee, Minnesota, Oregon, Washington, New York, and Arizona. And if I didn't list your state, don't think the stability and success of the coal industry doesn't affect you. 10 other states and foreign entities also receive Wyoming's coal. All of these numbers and stats boil down to this. Most of America's energy is powered by coal, and policies that raise the price of coal will hurt businesses and households across the country. It'll cost jobs in our country. It'll cause people to have higher utility bills. Unfortunately, the administration is either oblivious or unconcerned with this correlation, as evidenced by the Department of Interior's recent announcement that they will block most new federal coal leases in order to conduct a programmatic environmental impact statement on coal development on federal lands. About 40% of our nation's coal is produced via the Federal Coal Leasing Program. Under that program, which is managed by the Department of Interior, private entities compete for the right to lease and mine the coal mineral estate owned by the federal government. After a rigorous multi-year application and land use planning process, lessees are given an opportunity to mine coal on public land. That's a rigorous multi-year application process. This has been going on for years. In return, those companies pay the BLM a bonus bid, which is an upfront fee for the right to mine. Now, besides that, they also pay an annual land rental payment. And besides that, they pay an additional royalty on the value of coal after it's mined. Surface mines pay a royalty of 12.5%, and underground mines pay a royalty of 8%. These revenues are shared by the federal government in the states in which the coal was mined. This program, which began in 1920, has been a tremendously successful way to provide affordable energy to the nation, to provide jobs in places like Wyoming's Powder River Basin, where 85% of all federal coal is mined, and provide value to the government. According to BLM, Bureau of Land Management, the federal coal leasing program has generated well over $1 billion a year for the last 10 years, plus $7.9 billion in royalties and an additional $4 billion in rent, bonus bid payments, and other fees. Again, Mr. President, that's money the coal leasing earns for the federal government, a stark contrast to most federal programs. Now, that doesn't even mention the taxes that are paid by the workers who mine the coal. But if we eliminate their jobs, that money's not coming in either. But this administration has announced plans to halt new federal coal leases while it takes years to study the value and efficacy of the program. This Department of Interior rule has the potential to economically devastate my home state of Wyoming and send energy prices around the country through the roof. The BLM laid the foundation for this farce last summer when it staged a series of listening sessions. I went to the session in Gillette, Wyoming, and based on the administration's recent announcement, I don't think the BLM was listening very closely. If they were, they would know that American taxpayers are already receiving a fair return on coal resources. One gentleman who told the BLM his story moved to Wyoming to be a coal miner. He spoke with pride about his job. He was worried that the job that has allowed him to raise 3 children will no longer exist if the BLM raises royalty rates. The owner of a small business, not directly related to the coal industry, told her story. She was worried about the ripple effect raising royalty rates would have on Campbell County and the state of Wyoming. As a mom, she also told the BLM about the direct support coal companies provide her community through social service agencies, community events, and youth activities. She didn't want to see her kids lose that support. The benefits she referenced are a reflection of the $1.14 billion in tax and fee revenues the state of Wyoming collected from the coal industry in 2014. This money the state critically relies on to fund things like schools, highways, and community colleges across the state. And they're going through a process right now to try and figure out how to make up for the lost revenue just from last year, and are making drastic cuts like we wouldn't even consider here at the federal government, even though the state of Wyoming is in better financial shape than the federal government is. Now, I mentioned this woman who's the owner of a small business that's not directly related to the coal industry. She said that her business is down by 60%. That's almost 2/3 less revenue than what she'd have which means, of course, that it affects some other jobs in the community. So there's a huge ripple effect to all of this. Despite these and dozens of similar stories, the administration now says they need to shut down federal coal leases and conduct a study to determine if the taxpayers are getting a fair return on federal coal leasing program. For quite a while, they were paying more in taxes than they were getting the resulting revenue that they got to keep was less than what they were paying in taxes. And if the BLM would have only listened to the folks in Gillette last summer, they'd already know the answer to this. Instead, they've gone forward with a plan to cripple the coal industry and make energy more expensive. In the words of Wyoming's Governor Matt Mead, not only will Interior's new rule hurt miners and all businesses that support coal mining, it will take away the competitive advantage coal provides to every U.S. citizen. When it's part of the energy mix, it affects the other energy prices as well. Mr. President, as we debate energy policy reforms in the coming days, it isn't just the fate of coal that should concern us. Interior's federal coal leasing review is just the latest in a string of regulations aimed at driving fossil fuel industries out of business. The administration has also proposed a new methane flaring rule aimed at discouraging oil and gas leasing on federal lands. This chamber has spoken clearly in rejecting rules like the Clean Power Plan and the Waters of the U.S., but the administration continues its regulatory war on energy. As we consider energy policy reforms, we need to make sure we're protecting the resources that have and can continue to power America. That has to include coal. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.